Welcome back. Continuing from our previous video. With her last bit of power, she said yes and got ready to shoot again, even though she didn't know what he wanted her to do, but she would listen to him. Then she let loose an arrow that was super fast, like lightning, and it broke everything in front of it. She told her partner about the shot and asked him what to do next. He took her hand and told her that her shot had made a path for them and now they needed to run. Right then, the monsters came running at them and she was very shocked when she saw him run away from the monsters, pulling her with him. They ran far from the monsters quickly and they ended up at the front of a cave. Hania was trying to catch her breath and wipe the sweat from her face, saying that they lived through it. Then she wondered where they were and if they had really gotten rid of the goblins. She thought back to when they were running in the forest and remembered looking behind her and feeling like the monsters wouldn't be able to run as fast as them anymore, but she wasn't sure if anything was still chasing them. So much had happened that she couldn't even think straight. She looked at her partner who was using a lamp to light up the cave and she thought to herself why he was so calm, because they needed to get out of there fast. She gave a small smile and quietly said that she was finished for the day and that she would pay him the money he talked about before. He answered that they couldn't leave yet because they were still in danger, so they would have to stay there for a while since it was too dangerous to go outside. It seemed like they had made a path that the monsters could follow when they ran. So they had no choice but to wait for the goblins to go away. She asked loudly when they could leave, and he turned to her and said that it might take half a day, but it could be even longer depending on what happened. Hearing this, she shook a little and then grabbed her head, saying loudly, "Half a day." As she thought that they were trapped and going to die, she fell to her knees feeling hopeless, and he scratched his head, thinking that he was of course not telling her the truth. And they would be far away in about 30 minutes because the goblins were not very good at finding people, and it was a silly reason to stay, but he thought that Hania would believe anything at this point. He looked at the cave entrance again and thought that he did this to make her go into the cave with him, and as he was thinking about this, he closed his eyes and crossed his arms, and then he pictured her running out of the cave scared. But he wasn't sure if she would even agree to do that. Suddenly, his thoughts stopped when he heard Hania's voice sounding guilty. She stood up and bowed to him, saying sorry that it was all her fault because if she was a good fighter, and if she had gone alone from the start, then none of this bad stuff would have happened. And she felt really bad about everything. She held her weapon tightly and thought that she had made trouble again, even in a really easy dungeon, and she was acting like this, and she felt like she had no hope and shouldn't have even tried to come here. She started to cry and bit her lip, telling herself that she should not have come. Juno put his hand out to her and snapped his fingers near her face to get her attention and stop her sad thoughts, and he told her that if she felt guilty, then he would let her do something for him. But she needed to stop feeling sorry for herself and get it together. She was unsure and asked him what he wanted her to do, and he turned to look into the cave and said that they had a lot of time, and then he smiled at her and said he would tell her everything later, and after that, they both went into the cave and started walking deeper, using the lamp to see where they were going. Hania was still unsure and asked if he really needed her help because she was a high rank, but she didn't know much about dungeons and didn't even know what an elite monster was. He smiled because he remembered her saying that it was her first time in this kind of place, and he said that now he knew why she didn't know about it because it wasn't something that everyone knew. Instead of big bosses in this place, there was a weaker kind of special monster that lived in that cave for its own reasons, and he needed to beat that monster, but he had tried many times and could not even fight it, so that was why she was the first person who said yes to help him. When she heard this, she took a step back and got quiet, and he looked at her, wondering if he had said something strange. Trying to be brave, she pressed her lips together, then stopped walking and said in a strong voice that she would help him if he wanted her to, because she remembered the goblins in the forest and thought that helping him was the right thing to do since he had saved her. And she also knew how much it hurt to not be wanted in a team, so she needed to help him. Suddenly, her bracelet made a noise, and at the same time, they heard loud footsteps, and she got scared as the man shined the light in front of them, and a very big goblin with a club in its hand appeared. It was the special monster. Hania quickly moved in front and pulled back her bow, telling Juno to move away, and she thought that even though the monster was in the light, it was still a strong monster for this place, and if she hit it even once, it would die. Her arrow started to glow with magic chains, and she let it fly, seeing that it was going straight for the monster, and she felt happy that she was going to hit it, but all of a sudden the goblin used its club to block itself, and the arrow went right through the club, making her shocked. The goblin's leg moved back a little from the hit, and she wondered if the club had changed the arrow's path. But she was wrong and knew she needed to shoot with all of her power. She pulled back her bow again, but when she tried to shoot, her body would not listen to her, and her fingers would not let go of the arrow, and her hands were shaking, making her think nervously why this was happening now, and she needed to shoot. Hearing the loud noise again, she looked at the monster and saw it running towards them, swinging its club, and she froze in fear. Suddenly, the man grabbed her and threw her behind him, making her fall, and then he stepped forward just as a loud sound came and dust flew up. The monster had hit its club on the ground really hard. Looking at the dust, confused, she called out to Juno, and she remembered being in a dungeon before and feeling like this, when a girl from her team shouted that what she was doing was a joke, and she couldn't even shoot right, and when she did, it was in her friend's direction and she almost died because of her, and how was she going to make up for it? And then Gaia asked her to wait and said that even though she missed, she didn't mean to shoot at her. But the girl just smiled in a mean way, and asked angrily if she was making excuses because she was a high rank and thought she was better than everyone, and she would see what was going to happen to her soon. After they left the dungeon and Hania went to the hunter place, she was kicked out of the team, and other hunters started talking about her, saying she was a bad hunter, and they heard that she almost killed someone and couldn't even beat a weak monster. Someone called her an idiot and said that was why even low-level teams didn't want her, and another hunter asked why she was wasting her talent, and if she was so bad, why was she still a hunter? Coming back from her thoughts, she looked at the monster with a sad face, thinking that she should have just given up because even Jansu got hurt because of her. Right at that moment, the goblin lifted its club high up to hit them, but quickly a bright light flashed between them, and June said that he was not good at acting, and his sword easily stopped the monster's club. Hania, understanding this, called out to him surprised, and he said loudly that he knew it sounded silly, but she needed to listen carefully, and if she calmed down and did what he said, then they would win for sure. He frowned, thinking that he had made everything ready so that if something bad happened, she could use it without trouble, and now he just needed to wait. He kept swinging his sword and hitting the monster, and told her to look closely at that monster, and she would see something and should hit that spot with all of her power, but Hania was not listening to him anymore, and her body was shaking as she started to stand up, wondering what this feeling was because her senses felt very strong, and it was a little uncomfortable, but she could see everything very clearly and her eyes were shining. She pulled back her arrow again, thinking that now she could really see where to shoot, and she pulled the arrow back and focused completely, closing her eyes and then opening them wide, thinking that with this one arrow, everything would be okay. She aimed and shot the arrow, and it made a bright light in the air, and the goblin stopped moving, hearing the sound it made. The man said that luckily it seemed like everything had worked right, but for some reason it was very hard to make it work. Then the monster tried to use its club to protect itself from the arrow, but the arrow went right through both the club and the monster, making a big hole in its body. Seeing this, Juna smiled, thinking that it was worth all the trouble, while Hayo was very surprised and confused at the same time. Right after that, there was a big explosion and the monster's arm fell off because of the force, and the monster started to lose its balance before falling down completely. Hanel was still breathing heavily as the man told her that it would feel strange at first and that she had probably never felt her senses get so strong before, but he had to use a strong way to make her understand that feeling so she could see how strong she could be. Even then, Hania was still confused and asked him how he knew all of this would happen and what he meant by her potential. He smiled and told her to relax and that they had lots of time. She walked up to him and asked in an annoyed voice not to change the subject and to answer her question, but before she could finish talking, she suddenly felt a bad pain and grabbed her head, and then she passed out. The man had to carry her on his back all the way to the exit, sighing and saying that making friends was really hard, but at least one thing was done. Right when they got out of the cave, she woke up and the first thing she did was say sorry to him, saying she didn't know why she acted like that and felt like it wasn't really her, and she couldn't believe she was so rude to the man who saved her life twice. And she was very sorry for not trusting him and for passing out so suddenly. He was confused by her apology and then touched his head like he was tired, saying it was really okay and no one got hurt and they beat all the monsters, so she should calm down because it had already been half an hour. She nodded with tears in her eyes, and he asked if she could give him the necklace he had given her, saying that he had given it to her before they went into the cave. Remembering this, she put her hand in her pocket and gave it to him, and he looked at it closely and saw that the color of the stone had changed, so she had used it. He thought that meteor perception was a special thing that you could only get in a hard dungeon, and it had a power called keen senses that started working when some things happened, like if someone shot an arrow at the person wearing it, then their senses would get super strong and let them see and feel things better than normal. He gave the necklace back to her and thought that the problem was that it was hard to make it work because the person wearing it needed to feel very strong emotions like fear, so he made her feel very scared to make it work, and it was hard, but he did it to help her see her power even if it was risky. He thought that there were not many of these necklaces around and he had given up on finding one, but then Taehan found it in 2 days and because of him everything was easier, but this was just the start and Hania only felt strong because of the necklace and she needed to practice more to be really strong. His face got serious and he told her to listen carefully, and her first job was to make sure she only focused on the monsters, and to do that she needed to get a different bow because she was strong enough to use a long bow and shoot from far away so she wouldn't have to fight monsters up close and be as scared. He wanted to say more, but she stopped him and just thanked him, and he didn't know why she was thanking him, but she said she was thankful for everything, even the necklace, and when she thought she was going to die, she felt something from him like everything stopped and she could do anything, and she saw exactly where to shoot to hit the monster. She said that even though she was a high rank, she was really not very good, and the more she tried to be better, the more sad she got, but she felt like in this short time she had gotten much stronger, and she felt like she could do anything, and for the first time she let herself believe it. Realizing she had said too much, she got worried, but he smiled and said that it would be hard for her to do it alone and he would give her his phone number so she could call if she needed anything. She was very happy and thanked him again and said she would give him her number too, but when Juno was about to give his number, he saw a message from Taehan asking him to call quickly because it was an emergency, so he decided to call him later after they left the dungeon. After some time, when he and Hania got out of the dungeon, he called Taehan, who thanked him and said he would call back after a meeting. Jansu smiled and said he would help if he could because last time Taehan had given him something very useful. Taehan said he was happy it was useful and that he was glad June agreed to help him. Then he hung up and put his phone away, looking out the window when someone knocked on his door and Hugh came in and said that the boss of the Hunter place was back and they could leave soon. After that, they went to the Hunter building and walked in the hall, but Hisa seemed worried, saying that it was strange because usually the boss would send a paper and no one thought he would call him in person because he usually sent hard orders in letters. But if he called him himself, then maybe a really bad gate had appeared again. Taehan said it was okay because Jano had said yes to help and if he fought like before, then there would be no danger, and he smiled, thinking that he was smart to work with Juno. Hizu, on the other hand, was still worried, thinking that he seemed too happy even more than after the Iran dungeon, and it was probably because of that creator guy and he had been acting weird since the support offer. Who would have thought the guild boss would make such a surprising offer? She knew that berserkers were not good at controlling their feelings, but the guild boss was smart and careful, so maybe Juno was stronger than she thought, but she quickly said no to that idea, thinking that a low-rank hunter couldn't make a weapon that he really liked, and he didn't ask him to help very often, so she needed to see what was happening herself. Taehan saw her thinking face, and then they got to the boss's office door, and the guard outside asked them if he was alone. Taehan was a little surprised and asked if someone else was coming. The guard said that he heard 2 guild leaders were supposed to come, and if he was alone, he could wait. Taehan asked if he knew who the other leader was, and the guard saw someone behind them, and then pointed with a smile, saying that he had arrived, and Yak, the boss of the Shinma Guild, came up behind them, and when he saw Taehan, he shouted in a surprised voice, and hearing his voice, Taehan and his helper turned around fast, and Ak waved at him, saying he heard he was busy. Taehan didn't say anything, and Hizu frowned, thinking that this was the only person who made the guild leader angry. He gave a fake smile and said he didn't think he would see him there, and Taehan frowned a little, trying not to get angry. The Shinma Guild boss came closer and asked who Hizu was, and if Taehan was the bad guild leader Overkill, saying okay. Taehan didn't say anything, thinking how annoying he was, and mocking Aok said he was wrong because it wasn't the guild that was bad, but the boss. Taehan said he was too busy to listen to his silly words, and Ayak said he must be busy picking easy dungeons to make the new hunters like him, and Hizu didn't like this and asked what he meant. OK said it looked like it was true because he hadn't gone to hard dungeons to save anyone, and he had tried to beat a hard dungeon before and failed. Hizu was surprised, and Taehan put his hand on her shoulder, telling her not to answer him. He wanted to object, a protest rising within him, yet the words remained unspoken. Instead, he turned towards the guard, a silent decision made. They would proceed inside. He pushed open the heavy doors, announcing to the association president that the leaders of Overkill and Shinwa guilds had already arrived. Jman Han responded, his acknowledgement calm, stating he was already aware, their arguments audible even from their current location. A smile touched his lips as he added, a comment on their predictable nature that they never changed. Soon after, both men entered, leaving Hisa standing outside. The guard, noticing the girl beside him, hesitated slightly before offering her tea. She politely refused, indicating she was fine. Inside, the two guild leaders, Taihan and Aoki, sat facing Jman. He addressed them directly, stating there was an urgent task for their guilds, demanding immediate completion. 3 days prior, an unidentified gate had appeared on the city outskirts. Scouts dispatched to investigate had not returned. Taihan's brow furrowed, questioning if this gate was an error gate. Jman clarified, emphasizing the gate's undefined nature, the mana within it proving immeasurably difficult to assess. Aok exclaimed in confusion, struggling to understand the situation. Taihan considered it strange that the gate defied evaluation, tools designed for this purpose typically reliable. Gate rank, he knew, was usually determined by mana measurement and intelligence reports from the association. Gilman Hanan affirmed their understanding of rank error dungeons triggered by sudden mana surges. However, this time mana measurement was impossible. Taihan inquired about sending more scouts. Confirmation came, multiple attempts had been made, each scout team vanishing without a trace. Aoki threw his hands behind his head in frustration, demanding to know what information they had, dungeon rank, contents, anything. Suspicion laced his tone, questioning if the association was attempting to deflect blame. The association president responded, explaining their ignorance regarding the unknown rank gate's duration. He stressed the urgency, inaction risked monster emergence, a catastrophic event seen before. His expression turned serious as he acknowledged his words might sound forceful, but this was a genuine emergency, brooking no refusal. He wanted Overkill and Shinwa guilds to collaborate, clearing this undefined gate. Hayama Guild, he regretted, was unavailable due to an overseas mission. This situation warranted the involvement of the 3 largest guilds, and he established a 2-day preparation deadline. Funding and generous rewards were promised upon mission completion. He offered assistance with any needs. Reflecting on the briefing, Taihan questioned if the cleanup team should be limited to guild members. Kyan and Han replied that given the societal panic caused by the gate, only a small number of trustworthy individuals could participate. Yayak, observing Taihan's reaction, looked slightly surprised. Taihan then smiled faintly, confidence radiating from him, indicating understanding. Aok returned to his guild, tossing his jacket to a subordinate and ordering the assembly of a team of A-rank or higher guild members available within 2 days. Recalling Taihan's smile, Aok pondered the cunning he suspected. What was that smile hiding? Irritation sparked within him. He would seize this opportunity to surpass him. Annoyance fueled his next command. Urun Kong was to be included in the team. His subordinates showed surprise. They were instructed to ensure her presence without fail. The subordinates, nervous at the leader's unusual insistence on someone known for refusing assistance, noted her personality would likely lead to refusal. Aok retorted sharply, demanding they secure her attendance or face consequences. The guild members, intimidated, quickly affirmed their understanding and scattered to fulfill the order. Frustration still burning, Aok headed for the elevator. Urun Kang's typical reluctance to help was known, but he intended to leverage this situation to recruit her. 2 days later, the Overkill Guild team's first members gathered at the gate. A girl named Jean, noticing the absence of the others, inquired about the time. A male member replied there were 5 minutes until the scheduled meeting. Always punctual, Jean remarked, her distaste clear. She spun her weapon, stating her intolerance for Shinwa's slow, ill-mannered members. Her expression hardened, and she questioned aloud if a bullet to the head would improve their punctuality. The man, outraged by her words, smacked her head, scolding her to watch her language. Clutching her head in pain, she commented on his brutal strength. He stepped towards her menacingly, demanding she repeat what she'd said. She then took off running and he gave chase. Junio, observing the scene, commented to Taihan that his guild members seemed to get along well. Taihan replied that despite appearances, they were incredibly reliable in battle. He expressed gratitude for Jensu's agreement to participate, admitting he'd expected refusal. The protagonist smiled slightly, mentioning the item Taihan had provided him had been used. Taihan responded with pride. Turning attention to his fighting guild members, Taihan considered that, of course, this wasn't his only reason for being here. A secret mission awaited within this story-driven dungeon. He aimed to end the abandoned world and claim the rewards. The dungeon's opening time was 168 hours, and the mission window held unknown coordinates and rewards. Appearing 5 days ago, this secret mission rarely offered had appeared to him. Player selection hadn't begun, but he had already received it, seeing no reason to refuse. Despite their high difficulty, the rewards were incredible, potentially awakening new abilities. He mused about the coincidence of it being the same dungeon, so Taihin called him back from his thoughts, noticing his serious gaze. He apologized in advance for his guild member's rudeness. Just then, Aoki's voice was heard nearby, announcing their slightly early arrival. The vice leader and Jean immediately ceased their fighting. Taihin stepped forward as Aoki apologized for their early arrival, mentioning they had much to do. They understood Overkill likely had too much free time. Arriving with his team, Aoki sarcastically remarked they'd been clearing low-rank gates, hence their early arrival. Jean, irritated, moved to respond, but the man stopped her, urging her to ignore them. She wanted to object, insults forming, but he silenced her again, reiterating to ignore them. Junio, standing apart, considered the continued animosity between Overkill and Shinwa guilds, a rivalry both emotional and public, a constant dispute over guild superiority. Aoki, noticing a new face among Overkill, scrutinized Junio, then laughed, asking if he was their trump card. He declared they acted like they were something special, but it amounted to just him. Laughter turned to anger, and he sighed heavily, saying they were taking this dungeon clearing as a joke, asking if they wanted to be carried out. The protagonist remained silent. Aoki called them idiots. A girl from his team smiled, asking him to stop being angry, pointing out they also had a new team member. Orun Kong appeared behind them, her expression displeased. She reminded them of their claimed time shortage, stating they had no time for arguments and needed to hurry. Stepping forward, Junil recoiled in horror at seeing her, wondering at the team composition. Korea's strongest elemental master, capable of all 6 elements, Kong Orun, S-rank sorceress, Kim Aok, and their guild leader, Yoon Taihin. Such a star-studded team, she mused, remaining silent about Junio's abilities, as she didn't know them. Then, with a smile, she declared it would be easy, happy to handle it all. They then headed towards the gate. Junil thought it wouldn't be easy. In his previous life, the dungeon clear attempt had failed. Of 18 members, only Yoon Taihin had survived, mainly due to his infiltration ability. Afterward, the gate had vanished, an unprecedented case of missing high-ranking awakeners. The association's investigation yielded nothing. Success wasn't guaranteed this time. However, after entering the dungeon, their expectations were completely contradicted. The puppet opponents were surprisingly weak, the battles incredibly easy. Jansu grew nervous, questioning the ease. Sometime later, a portal with a glowing ring illuminated the dungeon's grand entrance. Ji commented on the mansion being cool, prompting Monjen to silence her. The team continued deeper when Monjen heard a strange sound from the portal and turned. He saw the gate closing forcefully. Others turned at the sound. He tried to open the doors, failing. He suggested breaking them down. The man shouted he wanted to destroy the doors, and they began attempting to break through. He counted loudly to 3, and they all struck the gate forcefully. They were surprised, asking what was happening as the door didn't even budge. Unsatisfied, the man told everyone to step back, declaring he would do it himself. However, he didn't have time as strange sounds emerged behind them. Turning, he saw eerie dolls. Attacking, he questioned what these creatures were. His strike shattered the dolls. The rest of the team joined the fight. His attacks were especially powerful, and he questioned how such weak creatures dared attack them. A girl called out, suggesting he use his skill, but he declined, stating it was unnecessary for something so trivial. Soon after, the girl shouted for the leader to turn as the monsters were reanimating. The dolls, using mana, began reassembling. He grinned maliciously, noting their revival ability was at least interesting. He threw a punch, and 2 enormous mana fists materialized. The dolls attacked, but he pummeled them with his magical fists. The rest of the team fought as well. Youngyin from Ji's team sliced dolls with his spear. At this point, only Junio and Urun remained on the sidelines. He asked if she wouldn't fight. Urun returned the question. He explained he was support. Urun stated there was no need for her to fight, uninterested in working hard for this team. She observed Taihin's powerful flames, his flaming sword setting dolls ablaze as they melted. Urun commented on seeing Korea's strongest awakened in action, unimpressed by Taihin's fire, finding everyone ordinary, unable to kill even a single monster. Had she known, she would have refused the mission. Junio noticed the dolls and their glowing threads. He thought it strange, contaminated mana and these monsters not in their usual form. Every doll movement seemed linked to thread movement. Looking up, he saw the thread source, mana connected to an artifact on the ceiling. Destroying it was the key, but he hesitated to reveal his abilities, then thought of using the agreement, it would be fine. Distracted, Urun killed a nearby insect with a magic crystal. The protagonist looked closely, asking if she had mana to waste on insects, why not attack the threads above? She pointed to the insect, reiterating her earlier point, she killed whoever she wanted. Junio, looking at the insect's ashes, considered that maybe no further investigation was needed. He began creating something, suggesting Urun was afraid of insects. As he formed something from mana, she retorted, denying fear and demanding he stop talking, finding him annoying. Junio apologized, claiming no intrusion was intended, mentioning an insect also being up there. He created a shield with a spider beside it. Urun, irritated, prepared to attack with fire. Junio immediately withdrew the shield as she unleashed a huge fire stream at the threads. The fireball destroyed everything. Urun seemed confused. One doll stopped moving. Aok struck another, wondering why Urun, the troublemaker, was using her abilities now. He suddenly felt something strange looking at the doll he held by the head. He questioned why they weren't resurrecting. Annoyed, he squeezed the doll's head, declaring he was finally warmed up, but these weak monsters were nothing. The wall broke, glowing with intense mana. Junio walked towards it, absorbing the mana. He realized this was the source of the doll's resurrection. Had he not noticed the contaminated mana, he might never have found it, realizing this could have been the reason for the previous dungeon clear failure. Taihin stood before a mountain of doll pieces, declaring them finished. However, uncertainty remained and they needed to search the entire first floor. The man with glasses confirmed understanding, urging everyone to follow. He ran ahead, knocking down a door with his body, but Aok overtook him, shouting for everyone to move aside as he would be first. More dolls were in the room and Aoki started punching them. The protagonist looked around, wondering if contaminated mana was gathering in a cabinet. He pointed, asking Jaiwei if she could shoot at it. Initially confused, she followed his advice. Her weapon shattered upon firing. Everyone was shocked. Manjen, bewildered, questioned what was happening, why everything was suddenly dying. Jaiwei tried to distract him. They proceeded through the rooms, quickly clearing the first floor. Taihin was first to the second floor, announcing they could proceed as the first was cleared. Aoki, dissatisfied, retorted he already knew, demanding Taihin stop acting like the leader. Taihin turned, not responding, leading Manjen and Jaiwei forward. She smiled, spinning her gun, remarking on its beauty. Manjen looked at her enthusiastically. Heya, furious, thought Taihin was ignoring him, irritation rising. He wanted to crush Taihin's pride. Suddenly, he felt something unpleasant looking at his palm. He was confused, a sudden pain. Had he overdone it? He ordered his team forward. Heron volunteered to go with the leader. A staircase with a strange incline was ahead. Junio, watching them, worried as Taihin had claimed nothing special was there. Separating from the team, he entered a room, deciding to check himself. Dusty and dark, he covered his nose. He soon saw threads with infected aura on the floor, surprised by the mana. A loud noise erupted. Aok was fighting fiercely against monsters, shouting he had no time for skills. Other team members fought with equal fury, shooting and cutting, but nothing worked. Taihin stood his ground, deflecting monster blows with his sword, asking if everyone was okay. He realized they were under attack by high-level invisible monsters. Manjen shouted his reassurance of being unharmed. Nearby, Ji also declared herself fine, but expressed confusion about the whereabouts of her companion. Manjen, filled with excitement, began searching the room. He seemed to perceive subtle wind currents responding to each person's movements. A growing worry surfaced as he realized Juno's absence had gone unnoticed. He started calling out Juno's name, his voice rising. Meanwhile, the protagonist, positioned near the contaminated mana source, registered the distant scream. He understood the battle above was intensifying. Having already absorbed the mana, he knew speed was critical. Suddenly, a concealed passage materialized before him. He peered into the dark basement, pondering the possibility of enemies lurking below. He decided against prolonged deliberation and began his descent. A figure materialized from the gloom. Surprise flickered across his face as he recognized a child. He questioned internally what a child could be doing in this place. That's all for today. Please support this channel by giving it a like, subscribe for more content, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'm already working on the next video, so stay tuned.